Evil is festering amid the ruins of the Jade Abbey, and a band of ill-matched heroes are the only thing in the way of the demonic warlord Gelgus Pust and his desire to taint the life-giving waters of the Everspring found deep within. It's time to take up the sword and embark into the depths of Warhammer Quest Darkwater. Hello and welcome. Today I'll be showing you how to paint every miniature in the box in this beginner-friendly guide with only 20 paints, ready to start playing the exciting narrative campaign with friends and family. Before we start painting, we first need to build our heroes and scions. First, read the construction guide for the model that you are building before cutting anything out to avoid mixing up the wrong parts. Once you're confident about the parts you need and their order, use the flat side of the cutters to gently snip the model's connector. The model will come away easily. Then, using a mold line remover, scrape away any remaining connector plastic. With the model cleaned up, it's ready to be put together in the order from the guide. Always double check that they are the right parts before the final squish. By the end, you should have all your models built and ready for painting. On screen now are the paints and brushes we'll be using to paint both the heroes of the Jade Abbey and the scions of the Plague Father to completion. These are just our suggestions, so feel free to switch these up for something that best suits you. Additionally, we'll need a Warhammer water pot, paper towel, and a palette. Now, to painting. First, we need to apply an undercoat to the models. Using a base paint like Abaddon Black for this will be perfect. It'll give a nice dark layer of paint to all of the other colours to adhere to and can be applied right over the plastic. Shake your paint pot really well, then pop it open and let the tab click in the back so it stays open. Then we want to get some of the paint on our medium base brush, just enough to cover half the hairs. Place them on your palette and we can use it as we go. And then twist the brush to remove any excess. This is also good practice for all the paints when painting. Once you're ready, you can start applying it to the model. Don't go back over the same area right now, as you could move drying paint and create streaks. Keep moving around the model, and once it's covered, we can move on to the next miniature, repeating the same process. This important part will give a layer of paint on the model for all further layers to sit on nicely. If you don't do an undercoat, you could potentially start to see areas on your models where the paint easily rubs off the plastic. Leave each model to fully dry for about 5 to 10 minutes, then you can go back over with another thin coat to fill in any gaps or patches. With that, you'll have all your models ready for even more colours. Now to the first of our heroes, where we'll go into a bit more detail on each step before painting the rest. To start things off, we have Edmark Valoran, a man riddled with emberstone who's on a personal quest for redemption. We need to start to block in our base coats, beginning with Leadbelcher to paint his armour, the axe head and handle. Base coating is when we paint, normally with base paints, the main colours that make up the model. You can either use it straight from the pot, or you can thin it with a drop of water, helping the paint flow from the brush, leaving a smoother finish. Leave each coat to dry fully before applying another, leaving you with a nice solid colour. With the first colour applied and dried, let's pick out all of the gold with Retributor armour. This includes the Manticore icons on his helmet and shield, the trim around the shield, any Sigmar symbol, and the metal details on the scabbard, sword and axe. Metallic paints are fantastic, however they do leave metallic flecks of paint in your water pot, which can mix into other paints later on. Changing your water pot regularly while painting helps reduce the risk, leaving your miniatures shiny in the areas you want. Lovely jubbly. With the metallics in place, the next large area to paint is his cape. For this, we'll be using Mephiston Red. Thin this with a drop of water and apply it to the back of the cape. Painting this in long strokes down the cape keeps the paint as smooth as possible on the flat surface. Once we've covered the cape with the first layer, we can paint the bottom of the tunic around the legs while the cape dries. Go back over these areas a second time and you'll have a lush standout red against the metallic plate armour. For the inside of his cape, a base coat of Rakhar flesh fills this area in nicely, which will work perfectly for the ribbons flowing off his helmet, along with the wee skull on his base. Lastly, with this paint, twist the brush on a palette to get a sharp point to your brush. With this, apply a controlled amount of paint to his visor where his face is on show. Edmark is really taking shape. With 2 more paints, he'll be fully base coated. Corvus Black is a great super dark, almost black grey, which I'll paint to the fabric on show between the gaps in his armour, along with the armour plate around his neck and the rock he's standing on. To finish up, we have the browns to paint. We're using Steel Legion Drab, applying this to his scabbard and on the inside of his shield. With a sharp point to your brush, you can also add a small line between the black where a leather strap is, which will also help break up the black in this area. The last thing to do is to pick out the raised detailing on the bottom of the tunic, which completes the base coats for Edmark Valoran, who's looking pretty sweet right now. So let's take things up a notch with shading. For this, I'll use a shade paint which is a little different to our other paints. I'll start with Agraxur shade, using this first to paint the golden and brown details across the model. Shade paints are very thin and are designed to slightly tint flat surfaces of miniatures while settling into the recesses. You'll notice how this creates depth on the miniature by darkening down those recessed areas. We won't need to add any water to this paint. Just take it straight from the pot, making sure that there isn't too much on your brush. This will be a great shade for both the Mephiston Red and Rakarth Flesh areas, giving these an all-over coating of this shade. When you're doing an all-over shade like this, work in small sections. We do this because it gives us enough time to fix any areas where we might have applied too much paint. You know when you've applied too much because you'll see the paint pooling in recesses and on large flat surfaces, thus clogging up the awesome details on your model. Don't worry though, fixing it is really easy. Just dry up your brush and soak up the excess paint with your dry bristles. Once your model has had Agrax Earthshade over it, let it stand and dry for around 30 minutes. Now that the first shade has dried, we have one more to apply, Nuln Oil. Applying this to the plate armour. Using different shades lets you play with different effects, with this shade leaving a clean, polished look to these metals. Lastly, we just need to coat the axe handle and blade, which finishes up the shading. As you can see with all the shading in place, Edmark looks ready to enter the Jade Abbey. With one extra step, we can really help him on his way to redemption. For this, I'm using Screaming Skull and a small dry brush to highlight the whole model, making your models look even better. So let's start showing you how. Okay, let's grab our dry brush and dip the bristles into the reservoir of the lid. We just need enough to cover the tips of the hair, like so. To prepare the dry brush, take a paper towel and start removing the moisture from the paint by rubbing it in circular motions into the paper. Just be gentle when doing this so that there's still paint on the brush and the paper doesn't rip. As this motion gently removes the moisture, you can see the trail of paint becoming faint, which means the brush is ready to use. Now all we're going to do is gently brush over the top of the edges and details like so. It'll catch all of those raised details without getting the paint in the recesses. A light touch is key here, and slowly but surely you'll start to see it already picking out the raised details. Edmark Valoran is now fully painted, filled with shading and highlights that really bring everything to life. We'll tackle the basing later in this video, so for now we'll pop him to one side and pick up our next hero and use all the skills we've just learnt. Next up is the Renegade Saint, guided by the wisdom of a forebear, Brian Tallis. First things first are our base coats, starting with Leadbelcher for our armour, sword and the metals on the lantern, painting at least 2 thin layers of this paint for a solid colour over the black undercoat. Next we'll paint the remaining metallics with Runelord brass, including the hilt on her sword, the scabbard and chest detailing, her shoulder pads, and even her right knee, breaking up the armour panels for some added visual interest. With the metallics in place, Bren's halfway to being fully base coated. Change the water and we'll be ready for our next paint, Barrack Nar Burgundy. Applying a few thin coats of this to her cape, being careful around her neck to avoid getting any on the armour. Mistakes happen though, and we can clean any up with the original base coats. With Rakarth Flesh, we'll use this for her face and the fabric wrappings around her armour, along with the skulls on her back. Then I'll use Steel Legion Drab to paint her hair, chest and the wooden pole. Great stuff, she's all set up for a spot of shading. We can use shades from the pot, but we can also thin them slightly for a lighter touch. I'm adding a drop of water to Celia Green shade on a palette to lighten the colour. Then start painting this onto the steel armour. It's okay to let this pool a little, but if any larger spots appear, we can soak up any excess where needed. This will give the steel a light greenish tint that will closely match the box art. As for the sword, a full coat of Nuln Oil straight from the pot gives this a clean metal finish. Next apply the dark brown Agrax Earthshade to all of the brass sections, her face, hair, and basically everything else on the back of the model, cape and all. With that, Bren is basically ready to go. We just have one extra step, and we'll have those details standing out even further. And that's by gently dry brushing a lighter colour, such as Screaming Skull, across the most prominent areas. This includes her face, backpack, and the edges of her cape. You can also use this to highlight the raised metal areas. The strip armour plating, in particular, lends itself very well to a light dry brushing. Brilliant! The Renegade Saint is prepared to fulfill her ancestors' wishes in defending the Jade Abbey. Our next hero is a water caster beyond compare, who holds the Jade Abbey very close to her heart. To start Inara Scion, the Cleansing Blade, we'll want to block in her white dress with a few thin layers of Corax White, being careful around areas like the belt, bags and hair, as we want to keep these black for now. I'll even paint this to the water flowing from the jar, ready for us to add a cool water effect to later. Take your time building these layers up, and with a few passes, you'll have her ready for the next colours. Starting with Leadbelcher, apply a coat of paint to the sword's blade, along with the amphora jar in her hands. I'll follow the silvers up with some gold touches, painting Retributor armour to the sword's hilt, belt, and even on the spout of the jar. With the metallics in place, we can move to the remaining details. Bugman's Glow is a great base paint for rosier skin tones, and we'll be using this to paint Inara's face, hands and feet. As for her hair, bag and belt, a layer of Corvus Black will do the trick. Once they're done, I'll paint the rock she's standing on with this colour too. Then we come to the pale blues. The fang's greyish blue colour will serve us in a couple of ways. First to be used as a base coat for the patterned square just below her neckline, as well as for the trousers visible under her dress. As for the watery effect, add 2 drops of water to the paint on a palette to create a more fluid consistency, similar to the shade paints we've used on the other miniatures. Make sure to remove any excess paint from the brush to avoid overloading the area. Apply the thin paint to the watery detail. It'll flow into the recesses while leaving the raised areas with their white base coat. This technique will create a simple water effect in just moments. And that's that! Inara Scion's base coats are complete and ready for shading. We're using Agrax Earthshade first to shade her face, hands and feet, along with the base as a whole, including the golden details on her belt and sword. I'll even apply this to the entire amphora, giving the metals an ancient feel. Mix 2 drops of water with the shade on a palette, and paint her dress with this lighter brown colour. Pull the paints down in long strokes here. By flicking the brush off the end of the skirt, you'll avoid any pooling across the flat surface. If any appear, we can soak them up with a clean brush. If you'd like a slightly muddier look to the dress, you can add a second coat like I'm doing here, just around the base of the dress. Layering shades like this is an easy way to build up different effects and darker tones with each pass. To enhance the sword's blade, apply a coat of Nuln oil to darken it. Once that is complete, I'll use this shade on her hair, allowing it to seep into the deep recesses of her locks, as well as on her belt, bag, and the blue fabric on her dress and legs. Leave her to dry for around 30 minutes, and we'll be ready to add some highlights. As a finisher, apply a dry brush of Screaming Skull to pick out the raised areas, especially around the base, where we've added the muddier effect, which will give this area a little extra texture. And that's Inara Scion completed and ready to defend what she holds dear. Up next we have the Dwarden, Drolf Ironhead, one of the few remaining in his clan with a personal grudge against Gelgus Pust. We'll start with base coating the fang to his clothing, specifically the parts on show with his hooded cloak, sleeves and trousers. Next I'm painting Rakarth flesh to the rope details, on the top of his boots and gloves. Even using this to paint his face while we're at it too. Now that we have his face painted, we can paint his beard. We'll be using Jacaro Orange, giving our Dwarden a fine ginger beard. Then I'll paint Steel Legion Drab to all the remaining leathers and fabrics across this grizzled explorer, like his gloves, boots, straps, the axe handle and backpack. Blocking in all these colours leaves us with 2 more to go. The first being Retributor Armour, painting this to the axe trim with a few thin layers of paint. To finish things off, I'm using Leadbelcher for the axe head, the armour on his chest and shoulders, plus any metal hoop located across the model, and the metals on his gun hanging on the bag. Which gets our Dwarden Explorer set for a couple of shades. So to start these off, I'll use Agrax Earthshade to shade the golden details on his axe, the brown leather on his bag and gloves, including the Rakarth flesh bits at the top of the gloves and boots, the rope detailing, and even his face and beard. Soak up any excess as you work on each section, and once this is nice and dry, we can move on to our next shade. He's looking great already. With our second shade, Nuln Oil, we can use this to shade all of the silver metallics for a clean finish. The last area to shade is the blue cloth with this shade too. Apply a single coat over this blue, then leave this to dry completely. Now that it has, apply a second layer of Nuln Oil over the hooded cloak. This will darken the colour further, setting it apart from the now lighter blue on his arms and legs. Adding more than one layer of shading to areas is a great way to shift the colour and tone of base coats, letting you keep things simple with fewer paints. We'll then use Screaming Skull to highlight the model with a light dry brush. Gently flick the brush over the beard, along the edges of the clothing, especially over the rope and leather detailing. This completes Drolf Ironhead, ready for his journey of personal retribution against Pust. Kelthanor the Forest Prince has chosen his target to prove his worth, that being one Gelgus Pust. There is quite a bit to do to Kelthanor, so to start things off, I'll begin to paint Corvus Black on his horse's body up to his torso. As this is the deepest area, it'll let you paint this without worrying about getting the paint onto other areas if done later on. Next I'll paint Rakarth flesh onto the remaining skin tone across his torso, arms and face. Like before, doing this first means it's all good even if a bit gets onto other details, as we'll be painting over those later. With that sorted, I'm going to use Wild Flesh's dark green to paint his cape, giving the prince a foresty touch. With the largest areas painted, we can now focus on all the smaller details. Beginning with Steel Legion Drab, paint his hair, bow and arrows, and any leather detail, like his quiver and the dagger sheath, along with the horn on his waist. As for the remaining woven leather, I'll use Baraknar Burgundy's deep red tone to help break up the different leathers across the model. With the leathers finished up, we'll next tackle the feathers with Jacaro Orange, painting this onto both his head crest and all the fletching on the arrows. The last thing to do is to paint all of the metallics. For this, I'll use Retributor Armour, painting this onto the trim surrounding the woven leather armour panels and the metal parts of his head crest and bow. Finally, let's paint Leadbelcher to the last of the metallics, such as the arrow's head. With the last paint applied, Kelnathor is prepped and ready for shading. For our first shade, I'm using Nuln oil to deepen the recesses across the horse part of his body and the arrowhead. Easy peasy. I'll next use Agrax Earthshade for the majority of the model, placing this onto his skin and any red and brown leathers, as well as the bow. While painting his hair, the woven armour and his bow and arrows, let this flow onto the golden trim and orange arrow fletching too, shading them all at the same time. For his head's crest, we'll apply it in a slightly different way. Holding the miniature upside down, apply a generous amount to both sides, and we'll let gravity pull the shade downwards towards the tips of the feathers. Leave this to dry upside down, and it will give these feathers an easy to achieve blend from light orange to dark brown at the ends. The last shade we'll be using is a Thonian Camo shade. This is perfect to shade the green cape with, applying a smooth coat across the whole surface. With the shades nice and dry, I'm going to apply a dry brush of Screaming Skull next to the most textured areas like the armour, quiver and feathers. A little bit on his face and hair also makes these areas stand out. I'll also add a heavier dry brush to the very ends of the bow, and as you move towards the middle, be a little more gentle. This will give the bow a sweet blended tone running throughout. With the dry brushing complete, Kelnathor is fully painted and ready to start his hunt. Drasher Von's bestial form comes from the ebon claw he carries, seeking to cleanse it in the waters of the Jade Abbey. I'll first add a base coat of Corvus Black to the belt, which preps the area to paint the gemstones with the next paint, along with his boots and the hand grip on the ebon claw while we're at it too. Now that the belt has been painted, it'll make it far easier to paint Jakara orange onto the gemstones in the centre. This will be a great colour to use for his body fur above the belt, adding a couple of thin coats of paint to block this out nicely. To finish off the upper torso, I'll use Bugman's Glow, painting a small amount onto his face between the fur, along with the smoother sections of his chest. Next we'll want Steel Legion Drab to paint his fur pelt around his legs. I'll add a few thin layers here to build up the colour, then we can paint his horns, claws and bottom lip with this colour too. Lastly, for the Ebon Claw, a base coat of Lead Belcher gets this ready for shading. Along with the claw, let's paint his pendants and headband with this colour as well. We are rampaging our way through this bestial hero, and with the base coats completed, we can crack open the shades. Starting with Agrax Earthshade, I'll paint this onto the orange and brown furs, soaking up any excess if any major pooling occurs, especially over the smoother areas of his arms and chest. This can go over the other details too, shading all of these at the same time. This includes the gemstones, claws and horns, even the metallic pendant and headband. Once he is completely dry, we'll be able to start applying the next shade. We'll be using Nuln oil to shade the Ebon Claw, giving this strange artifact a clean metallic finish. We can also add some at the bottom of the brown pelt around his legs, putting the paint downwards to help it build up at the base for a darker gradient. Lastly, paint this onto his boots and belt. Take your time around the gemstones and orange fur as you go, to keep this area as bright as possible. If some does get on there, quickly use a clean, damp brush to soak up the excess and it will be good as new. What a great model, and with all of that fur, he's built for dry brushing. With our trusty Screaming Skull, dry brush this across his belts and boots, defining the black areas nicely. Then comes the fur. Softly flick the brush over the fur, which will pick them all out pretty quickly. You don't want to press down too hard, just enough to let the paint catch all the raised hairs. While doing this, make sure to pass over the chest and face a few times with a circular motion. With a gentle touch and a few passes, this will gradually lighten the chest and blend it slightly into the orange fur. Way nice! Drasher Vaughn is now complete, ready to unleash his animalistic fury. Jacobus Fine is our next hero, accompanied with his trusty familiar and guardian, Whisper. Let's start the base coating with Ironrack skin on the inner robe and all over Whisper. Keep the paint thin while applying, and with a few coats of paint, you'll have a fully coloured robe. This will also look lovely on the circular part of his staff, so be sure to add a couple of layers there before moving on. Next we'll use Steel Legion Drab to paint the wooden branches and staff, moving up the area where we applied Ironrack skin too. Then to finish the browns, paint the Sprite Owl perched on his shoulder with this colour too. For the cape, apply a couple of thin layers of wild flesh will do the trick nicely. This colour is also perfect for painting the leaves on his staff, as well as a few branches running along Whisper. To do this, start from the top of his head, and then pick out some of the raised branches on the sides to create a varied coloured effect. Whisper is basically done at this point, but we have a few more base coats to go for Jacobus. First, let's paint his skin with Rakarth flesh, letting us get in and around the face before we paint the beard. With his face painted, apply Corax White onto his beard. This way round allows us to tidy up any potential spillover in such a small area, letting you also paint his bushy eyebrows alongside the beard. For his belt, a base coat of Corvus Black holds his robe together, which will suit his bag as well. To finish up, add a coat of Lead Belcher to his blade and belt buckle. Now that we have these base coated, it's time to have some fun with shades and shift some colours about. Let's start with Celia Green shade. Apply this to his robe, being careful to avoid the area just before his feet and sleeves that come forth from the inner robe. The dark green colour will lighten the base coat and provide shading all at the same time. This paint works exceptionally well over the Corvus black belt as well as the Leadbelcher buckle, giving these a subtle green undertone. Another green shade that would complement this nature-themed character is Athonian Camo Shade. Use this colour to paint a staff, including all the leaves along its length, stopping just before the bottom. While this staff dries, shade the cloak with Athonian Camo Shade and apply it to Whisper in its entirety. This will create a similar effect as the previous shade did for the inner cloak, giving Whisper a slight olive tone over the ironrack skin. To finish the shading on Jacobus, apply Agrax shade to the bottom of his staff that connects to the branch he stands on, including his feet. Working up from here, shade the inner robe on show around his feet and arms, moving to his hands and face to finish the skin tone. If some goes onto the beard, all is well. Let this dry and repaint the area with Corvex white if needed. Lastly is his owl sprite friend. Then, with Nuln oil, shade the blade and his beard. Leave the Jade Wizard to completely dry, and you'll be set for dry brushing Screaming Skull to both miniatures, building up the highlights with a few passes along the edges and raised details. With the highlights in place, Jacobus and co are looking fantastic. Screaming Skull is simply perfect for a wide range of highlights, and if you decide to batch paint these, it means you can do this last step altogether. But what is batch painting? Well, let's show you how with the Scions of the Plaguefather. Batch painting is a fantastic way to paint your units quickly and effectively. This is done by blocking in each colour over each model at the same time, keeping things consistent throughout. And as the Scions of the Plaguefather have the same scheme, we'll get these done in no time. I'll show off all the unique characters and a few of their minions, but you can apply all of these techniques to the entire Nurgle host. Right then, let's start with the putrid skin tones. We have 3 colours on offer to mix and match with: Ironrack Skin, Bugman's Glow, and Rakarth Flesh. Group the miniatures you'd like in one of these 3 colours, and we'll start painting with the first paint, Ironrack Skin. In this group, I have Gelgus Pust himself, the Cankerborn, and a mix of Pestigors and Pox Wretches. This pale colour is also great for the tokens and Maya Kelpies, setting these up for a few shades later and gives the Kelpie skulls a natural looking colour too. In the Bugman's Glow corner, we have Mulgoth the Cleave, the Blight Templars, a Pestigor, and another Pox Wrench for good measure, painting this onto their bloated flesh, exposed innards, and tentacles. Rakarth Flesh is a great muted sickly flesh colour, perfect for Belga the Cyst Witch, Shaman Foulhoof, and any remaining Pestigors or Pox Wrenches knocking about. With the skin tones all blocked in with a few coats of paint, these Nurgle followers are already looking disturbingly good looking. A constant throughout the masses is Steel Legion Drab, painting this onto the leather straps, gloves, fur pelts, belts, a few Pox Wrenches trousers, and any wooden details like Belga's staff, shields, or axe poles. This versatile paint can go on a few other details too, namely any hoof or horn across the miniatures. As for the Pestigors and the Shaman's Cloak, let's keep this dark by applying Corvus Black, using this to also paint the scraps of fabric hanging from the Blight Templar's armour. I'll also add this to the Cankerborn's rocky protrusions that goes up and around their backs. Baraknar Burgundy's reddish hue is perfect for Belga's clothing, adding a few coats over the whole area. We can also add this to the Shaman's mask, adding a dash of colour to the otherwise dark scheme. If you want to make your Nurgle creatures even more disgusting, add a drop of water to Baraknar Burgundy on a palette for a slightly thinner mix. And with this, apply it to any boil, open wound, or mutated body part, giving the skin tones a real gruesome, bruised effect that will work on any base coat. As an added bonus, this colour will do wonders to any tongue sticking out of their Scions' mouths. For the remaining clothing, mostly on the Pox Wrenchers, who I've split into 2 groups. On one side, paint a few layers of Corax white on their shirts and bandages, even the wrappings found on the other models. This will be a perfect colour for many skulls across the range. Make sure to go over every miniature. You'll be surprised where they might be hiding. Whereas the other group of Pox Wrenchers is painted with War Flesh. Lastly, add this colour to the hairy sections on the Cankerborn to break up their lighter skin colour. With almost all of the base coats applied, we mainly have the metallics and a few smaller details left to paint. Since these weapons are quite rusty, we will start by painting all of the bladed weapons with Jakaro Orange. This will provide an orange rusty undertone for the metallic paint that we'll apply next. After that, we'll add a dry brush of Leadbelcher over the weapons. This technique is a quick way to achieve a rusted effect, as the dry brush will leave a nice orange rust colour in all the recesses. With the weapons painted, I'll move back to using a small base brush and begin to paint the remaining metallics with a smooth base coat of Leadbelcher. That'll be things like the armour, shield trim, and bells scattered across the Scions. Then, with Runelord Brass, you'll want to paint this onto the random medallions, Nurgle symbols, sword hilts, and draping chainmail. It's a stellar choice as an old-looking metal, and will look grand next to all the other gritty metallics. With the metallics applied, there are a few small details left to finish. First, Belga's cauldron of rancid gore needs to be base coated with Avalon's sunset. Once that's done, we can do a final pass with ironwreck skin, applying it to all the skulls and maggots found on the scions, especially those seen on Belga. Speaking of the Sis Witch, she also has one additional detail to paint with Bugman's glow: the claws along her maggot body, which will also work at painting these tongues and gums across the collection. Yucky stuff! The scions of the Plague Father are really taking shape, with all their base coats placed in quick succession thanks to batch painting them all. Let's bring out the shades. Starting with Agrek Surshade for the vast majority of the shading, giving all but Pust and the Kelpies and the Cankerborn a full coating of this shade, making sure to add this to the rusty weapons, brass detailing and wooden sections across all of the models. It'll dirty down the clothing and fabrics on everyone, as well as shading the skin tones and armour across the Pestigors, Poxwrenchers, Belga, Mulgoth and the Blight Templars. With each of these shades, leave them to dry before applying the next paint. It's pretty handy when batch painting. You'll find that by the time that you've completed the last miniature, the first one you've worked on is usually dry, ready for the next colours. For the demonic creatures, such as Pust, the Cankerborn, and even the smaller demonic tokens, using a greener shade like Athonian Camoshade adds an unnatural touch to their skin. This shade will also work well on the armoured models by tinting the silver metallics with an eerie, deep green tone that will delight Nurgle. You can take it a step further with Celia Green Shade by applying it to the deepest recesses of the now green armour. This will create a beautiful two-toned green steel effect. While we have this paint, I'll add an all-over coating to the Maya Kelpies. Once the Kelpies are completely dry, apply a second coat to reinforce the colour across their backs, avoiding their skull faces and horns, which will deepen the shading even further, while keeping the other details slightly lighter. I often use this technique of layering shades myself, as it allows you to subtly shift the base coat colours, resulting in some pretty impressive, easy achievable effects. Painting is all about having fun, so have a play around and see what interesting combinations you can come up with. To tie everyone together, we're reaching for the dry brush once more, this time to highlight everyone with a light dry brush of Screaming Skull. You don't need to go too heavily with this, just enough to catch the raised details. It's also time to add in the details to Pust's black sword, picking out the faces embedded in the sword with a few light passes. You might be surprised to find it'll highlight the armour and weapons too. Even though this paint is a metallic, the cream colour lends itself to the overall rusty aesthetic we're going for. By painting all of these at the same time, we've effectively sped up the process, allowing you to feel a huge sense of accomplishment at the end, seeing the whole box set come to life. We do have one last bit to complete, and that's the basing. By saving this step until the end, we can ensure that both the heroes and scions share a cohesive setting. First, make sure that we've painted all of the rocks with Corvus Black, and the grass tufts and vines with War Flesh. Once that's done, we can begin adding a rocky texture using a paint called Astrogranite. This paint has a gritty consistency that, once dry, creates a natural ground cover for our models to stand on. To apply it, simply use a texture tool to scoop the paint onto the base. Carefully maneuver it around, using the small end for more precision in tighter spots. This will take approximately 1 hour to fully dry, so we'll let these bases dry for a moment. After a short while, we'll have beautifully textured bases. While you could leave them as is, adding a shade and some dry brush techniques will elevate their appearance further. To do this, I've chosen Celia Green Shade for its eerie teal green tone. However, any shade of your choosing will work here. Apply it liberally to the base, painting this both onto the tufts and rocks as well, being mindful of the model's feet to avoid getting any onto those. To complete the look and to pick out all of the roughened textures, apply a dry brush of Screaming Skull all over. Lastly, a painter's favourite bit, painting the base rims. This can be any colour of your choosing. For ours, I've gone with Corvus Black, framing the bases nicely with its almost black grey. And there you have it. Warhammer Quest Darkwater is fully painted and ready for either the heroes to succeed on their quest, or for Pust to have his way and corrupt the Everspring deep within the Jade Abbey. This has been an absolute joy to work on, and as an unbiased Nurgle fan, I can't say who I'd like to win out. But it's obviously Nurgle, right? Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial on how to get your Warhammer Quest Darkwater box set painted up. Let us know what your favourite character is from the box set in the comments below. Well, that's it from me. If you need more help, head to a Warhammer store where our staff can provide hands-on help. Or if you just want more info on getting started with painting, head over to our YouTube channel where we have lots of handy videos to help you get started. Thanks for watching. Ciao!